I'm Katie from What Katie Did, and today I'm going to be talking about corsets in the media and press and why you shouldn't believe everything you read. Last Thursday I was contacted by a broadsheet newspaper in the UK to do an interview about corsets, and I thought the interview was about Kim Kardashian's solution range of shapewear. It was called Kimono, which caused a whole flurry of outrage in the social media world, and she is actually changing the name. But because that had happened on Wednesday and the journalist called me on Thursday, I thought it was to do with Kim Kardashian, and it turned out to be to do with Mothercare, which I wasn't aware about until after the interview when the article came out. But Mothercare is a UK mother and baby brand in the UK. It's a very big chain, and the interview was actually about that. And it's quite interesting looking at it because the readerships are going down, and they basically, you snooze, you lose. And it's like, I'm already on to Kim Kardashian because, you know, I'm in the world of shapewear and lingerie, and I keep an eye on things, and the social media world keeps an eye on things. Whereas for print journalism, they're still working on stories from the beginning of the week and trying to make it relevant and trying to make something interesting to print and for people to read. The features about corsets in the last week are all to do with Mothercare and how they supposedly told women after giving birth that they should be wearing corsets for date night. And before this morning, before I did my research, I was going to say that, you know, when you Google corsets and when you Google waist cinches and everything, you get kind of sexy images. So I just presumed that it was some poor person at Mothercare who'd had to do a tweet, who had to do some kind of promotion and was under a time limit and Googled it, and that's what they came. And unfortunately, it all blew up. And it turns out that that's not true at all. And the story behind it is actually far more interesting. Now, I've spent an hour Googling and trying to find out how this story came about. And I can't find anything about Mothercare saying that women who've just had a baby should wear a corset for date night. What I did find, the brands they're actually selling is a brand called Belly Bandit. And what I can find is a tweet from Belly Bandit about the Mother Tucker corset, which Mothercare is selling, although they're not calling it a corset. There's no mention of corsets on the Mothercare website. And there's no mention of corsets on the Belly Bandit website anymore. This is a tweet from Belly Bandit that goes back to 2015, and it says, "The Mother Tucker corset is perfect for hashtag date night and beyond. Dress to compress with the ultimate in hashtag shapewear." Now, this tweet had 2 retweets and 2 likes, and it looks like all the press articles and controversy about Mothercare has come from this one tweet, which dates back to 2015, which doesn't actually mention pregnancy, post-pregnancy, Mothercare, or anything like that at all. And the timing of this tweet is very, very interesting, because in 2015, this was the heyday of the last press fiasco about corsets. And if you remember, this is when Cinderella came out, and there was all this controversy about Cinderella wearing a corset and whether she should have worn one and whether it was CGI and what happened. And I was interviewed a lot in the press for that. So to me, it looks like this brand has tried to jump on the back of the 2015 corset trend and make their waist trainers or whatever they are appeal to a wider audience than the post-pregnancy audience. So is something that's been blown completely out of proportion, and it was quite insightful for me, because I thought I know this story, I know what's happened, and it was just a mistake, and no, it was something completely different. But what makes this even more interesting is that the whole waist training garment industry, it comes from South America, and if you look at South America and South Asia throughout history, there is a traditional for women post-pregnancy to bind their tummies, and this goes back hundreds of years. And if you look at in the West, up until the early 20th century, women would have worn corsets. So you would have had a baby, and you would have had a corset to support you. and up into the 50s and 60s, you would have had a girdle to support you. And when you do have a baby, your whole insides, they do take a long time to get back to normal. And if you have an active lifestyle, like if you are in South Asia or South America and you're looking at 50 years ago and you don't have all the mod cons and you're walking a lot and moving a lot, it would help to bind your tummy, to support your back and to support everything as you moved around. And I did look at some of the reviews on the Belly Bandit website, and some of the people are saying they were recommended to wear something like this from their midwife because they simply couldn't bend over. They needed the support for their muscles to help and to support them. So there is actually a bit of fact behind the story, but it's just been totally misinterpreted and turned into this whole story about women, Mothercare saying women should be wearing corsets for date night after pregnancy, which isn't actually where the product comes from at all. The corset, the Belly Bandit belly wrap, that's what they're called officially, the belly wrap. Mothercare, they sell several different styles, and they also do this lace covered style, which is the one that the press picked up on. Unfortunately, they are using the images from Belly Bandit, which do promote the garments in not a sexy style, but they are on model size models, and the models are wearing high heels. So it's not presented in a realistic way at all. The one controversial thing I've found about this is that it says here, in a statement, Belly Bandit told the Times the corset was not designed to be worn immediately after giving birth. However, on their UK website, it still says, wear the Belly Bandit belly wrap for at least the first 6 to 10 weeks postpartum to achieve optimal results. So they kind of splitting their story there. There's obviously not enough room, or they don't feel strong enough to explain why they're selling these garments and what the history is behind them and everything like that. So it's a bit naughty there. When it comes to journalism and the press and newspapers in particular, there is a very, very fast turnaround, and there is a limited amount of research time available to the journalists. For example, when I did the interview for the Broadsheet newspaper last week, I was interviewed on the Thursday and the newspaper came out on the Friday, so it was super, super fast. And I was keeping an eye on it, but my brother got in there first, and he messaged me first thing in the morning, and he said, it's a shame they used such a clickbait headline, and what they actually said was, what a waste, why the corset has made a regrettable return. And the story behind this is, again, they need to get people reading, and they really can't say corsets are wonderful, everyone should wear a corset, because that would cause a tremendous outrage. So they have to be careful what they put. The majority of people don't wear corsets, they wouldn't dream of wearing a corset, so the newspaper has to put something realistically that will make people read the article. I'm actually the worst person to interview about corsets, because people will expect me to say how everyone should wear a corset and how corsets are great, and I'm just sitting there saying no, don't. And I really feel for the people trying to interview me, because they're not getting anything newsworthy at all, really. I've got an interview here actually for the Times from 2015, and let me see. I say about corsets, this was an interview for the Times in the UK, and I say it's more about being confident, powerful, and being in control while looking great as well. It has absolutely nothing to do with men at all. And this is an interesting sentence. It has absolutely nothing to do with men at all, because I remember the interview so well, because the interviewer actually didn't give me editorial control, but she let me read by email what she'd actually written, and I had to send back the email 3 times because she kept on saying men find corsets very attractive. What I actually said was, my husband says it's like cuddling a roll of carpet. They don't find it very attractive at all, but I had to send back that text 3 times, and in the end we get this rather straight-laced, it has absolutely nothing to do with men at all. So you can imagine if I hadn't been so pressurised about sending that line back again and again, something completely different could have been printed. And I have another quote, this time taken from the Telegraph in 2015, which is, I find quite amusing as well, because I say that sales have increased by half over the last 3 months. And I can remember my mum phoning me and my mum saying, "Isn't it wonderful?" And I was like, what's happened? And she said, "Your sales have gone up by 50%. And I'm like, yes, but that's because it was summer and they were down 50% in the summer. And she was like, oh. And it's funny because if you read something in a broadsheet newspaper, you think it's going to be true when in fact everyone can fiddle with the facts and come up, because I can't say, well, they went up because it's winter and people are more likely to wear corsets in winter and it's a party season. But I have to say something, otherwise nothing will get into print, and they need something interesting to print as well. So this is why these things happen. Once the media get hold of a subject that people are reading, then they try and go with it. And yesterday we actually had an email from a tabloid newspaper who were doing an article, and they wanted us to be involved, about how to stay slim and trim by wearing a corset. Our reaction to that, and Chloe in our London boutique, she CC'd me into the email she sent back, which was a little bit salty, and I spoke to her about it. She mentioned it yesterday, and she said, "Oh yeah, I wrote it like 5 times and I kept on reading it back to make sure it was polite and everything, because I didn't want to annoy everyone." But it's just so difficult to try and get the truth away from the nonsense when it comes to corsets. And my next video is going to be about how to stay slim and trim by wearing a corset, and what nonsense it is. I wear a corset every day, and I can tell you how it feels, what it does to your body, and basically all the behind non-theatrical nonsense that the press go for, because they need people to read their articles. And really, I want you to know the truth about it, about what wearing a corset actually does. So please follow us to find out about the next video as soon as it goes live. And if you have any questions in the meantime about corsets, please let me know and I'll get back to you. So in the meantime, take care.